We have neural networks both in our brains and in our machine learning algorithms. But what are these funny diagrams? Well, let's start with the brain. You have about 100 billion neurons in your brain. Most of them are actually not for thinking. They're in the back of your skull, and it controls automatic things like heartbeat and breathing. That wrinkled part on the top, your cerebral cortex, is where your memories and thinking happen. If we could stretch that wrinkled part out, it would be the size of a large handkerchief. And there would be columns of, let's say, 6 neurons each that would make it up. It's the 3 pounds of you that make you, you. But neurons, well, here's a diagram of a neuron, and it has a cell body with a nucleus. What looks like the branches of a tree are the dendrites connecting to input neurons. So that they're represented by the yellow arrows. When enough information comes in there, passing a certain threshold, then the neuron fires. Electrical signals are passed down the axon, what looks like a tail, to more little what look like branches or roots. They connect through synapses to other neurons. Each neuron is connected to about 10,000 other neurons. The guy with the microscope, Santiago Ramon y Cajal, is the guy who's responsible for giving the world an image of what neurons look like. Before cameras could be connected to microscopes, the late 1880s and 90s, he was an artist and neuroscientist, and his drawings showed in great detail to the world what neural structures looked like. So his drawing at the bottom shows columns of neurons, and you can see the heavy dots of the cell bodies, the long lines, dark lines of the axons, and the sort of spider web of the dendrites. His work is so important and interesting that you can actually buy framed prints and posters of the very first accurate neuron diagrams. So here are 3 of his images. The one on the left is an image of the cortex, of the motor cortex in the back of your brain. In the middle, the motor cortex across the top of your head, sort of from ear to ear. And the one on the right is of a child's cortex. You can see clearly it's made up of columns of neurons, all interconnected. So let's relate that to a machine learning neural network. And let's use the Titanic example from data that predicts whether a passenger would survive or die. So on the left, we have a column of input neurons and numerical information such as the cabin class, first class, second class, the title, and there'd be a number for that. But that would be like a master would be a young male. So we can tell young, old, and then family size, single, small family, large family. Those numbers get fed into the first hidden layer, the yellow layer. And those arrows aren't just directional things. They actually are weights that modify those inputs to each hidden neuron. The first layer of hidden neurons then process those numbers and forward them on to the second hidden layer, passing through, again, a system of weights to modify those up or down. And those move on to the final output neurons that show whether a passenger is predicted to survive or to die. Here's a slightly more complex neural network. The Titanic Network had information going into the input neurons and out the output neurons, just one way, called feed forward, modeled by the yellow arrow on the top. But that purple arrow on the bottom shows something that modern neural networks have, and that's called backpropagation. It's feedback. That happens actually in your own neuronal columns, where information flows through, but then you also get feedback for learning. So if we would want to train this neural network to identify pictures of dogs or cats, we'd have images as input. And we'd start maybe with training it for dogs. So we'd feed one photo of a dog at a time into the input neurons. They get processed in various ways in the hidden layers. And we already know by label whether each picture is a dog or a cat. So it feeds back and forth until the hidden layer weights are adjusted so that when we get an actual real picture of a dog, we get something like this. The weights in the final hidden layer are heavily weighted to give us a dog probability. And the cat pictures are the same. We feed in cat pictures, and those for cat pictures would be weighted differently, and the labeling would help us revise the network, train the network, so that we would accurately identify pictures. Once the network is trained, then the weights are solidified. They don't change. We're no longer training the network. We're now testing it with images of, in this case, a dog that the network hasn't seen. And it doesn't know if it's a dog or cat. But as it follows the weights of the network through the hidden layers, if it's a picture of a dog and it's a well-trained network, we would get a higher value, a higher probability that it's an image of a dog than a cat. In this case, 95% likely that it's a dog. In this case, 79% likely that it's a picture of a cat. The hidden layers are interesting because, like the neurons in your brain, you don't know what they're saying back and forth to each other. Similarly, in a neural network in machine learning, we know the inputs, we know the outputs, but we don't know how the weights in between are figured out. The network figures that out itself. Very interesting. So the machine learning AI actually becomes like a mirror where we can look into that and see a reflection of a different kind of learning. We can actually learn ways of thinking from that. And the book Algorithms to Live By Christian and Griffiths is a whole book on that. Tom Griffiths is one of the world's leading computational neuroscientists, so he has some real expertise. So things like Bayes' rule, where you learn that, your decisions are really probabilities. You can't be sure of the outcome of any of your decisions, just different likelihoods. And overfitting. When is it time to stop thinking and overthinking and act? If a neural network is overtrained, if it sort of thinks too much, it's too tightly fit to the training data. And it sees the test data as, that doesn't fit, because it's overtrained. So we don't want to overfit. The big ideas for this is that neural nets are connected neurons, both in the brain and in machine learning neural nets. A neural network model, is trained with labeled data, and the outputs are probabilities. Well, the system thinks it's this with such and such a likelihood, and that there are some lessons here for our own learning.